Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we focus upon walking the COVID tightrope. As usual, this is going to be a very informal chat, and I'd like you to take part by putting any questions that you have in the chat box, and we'll do our best to pick them up towards the end of the session. I'm joined today by the very talented and interesting Emily West, who you'll remember gave us such great advice at the start of lockdown in April. So welcome, Emily.
Thanks, Francis. It's great to be back. It actually feels like a really long time ago, like maybe several years past.
Yeah, from an experiential perspective, I completely agree with you. So, how are you and how has lockdown or the last few months been for you?
Well, I'm very good. Thank you for asking. I will say the other day, I think I've got COVID fatigue, which I think a lot of people have, in that at the start of lockdown, I'm very good in a crisis. I got loads of energy. I got very organized. I worked out my home office. I felt in control.
Yeah.
But I also felt like it was temporary.
Yeah.
And it's temporary, but now it's dragging on and your kind of well of resources and energy drops. So definitely the last couple of months, I've really had to work at managing my energy, managing my schedule, because that initial burst of emergency energy has definitely dissipated.
Yeah. Well, I thought, oh, this would just be a sprint, but I mean, this is like the worst marathon I've ever done in my life, and I've never done a marathon. So yeah, super tough, but it's great to have you here. I know it's going to be a lot of fun. Those of you that know Emily, she just says it like it is, but it's always helpful, always fun, always interesting. So let's start by thinking about some of the challenges that have brought us here. For a start, there's been so much uncertainty, and yet as human beings, most of us strive for certainty, and neither state is right or wrong, but maybe getting that balance right could make us feel a little bit more, if you like, comfortably agile, is where I would like to be anyway. Another challenge is about maintaining and building relationships. And we have to find some kind of balance between being visible all the time, being completely invisible, and as I've discovered with some of the people trying to sell to me, being quite frankly annoying. so there's another balance that we have to find. And then of course there's always the balance between work and personal life. So we have chosen these three areas to discuss today. Throughout the last few months, we've actually seen an incredible amount of each other's bookcases and how people are in their own homes. We've seen people, if you like, with their guard down, which I'm sure has got many, many benefits. But how do we get the balance just right so that our personal brand is strong and serves us well? So, Emily, how has COVID or lockdown or digitized workspace changed the way we're branding ourselves and the way our brand is perceived?
Well, it's totally changed how we connect with each other because it's pretty much virtual. So that's really changed how visible or not we are. And it is much harder to be visible from a personal brand perspective and to network in the virtual world. Whereas at work, you might be more visible because you're just wandering around the floor in the office and someone can see you, or they can see that you're in a meeting with somebody, or they can see the work you're doing. But actually, when the camera's off, no one can see what you're doing. So I think we've got to be conscious of how visible we are. And definitely at the start of COVID, everyone went a bit crazy. And I think there was a lot of over communicating and over zooming and being very visible. And we've realized that that's tiring and not sustainable. So as you said, everything today is going to be about how do we find that balance where we are connected with people and visible, but it's not too much.
Sorry, I can't actually see something here. Let me just change this.
Well, there's three parts of branding that I'd like to talk about. So shall I kick off with talking about that very point on visibility and how do you stay visible in this virtual world?
Yeah, go for it, please, while I sort out my slides, because something clicked up there. Thank you.
The first thing is just to think about who do you need to be visible to. Be very deliberate, map out your stakeholders. who in the office needs to know what you're doing. And it doesn't mean you have to Zoom call them. It might be that you have to email them to update you on what you're doing. But who do you need to be visible to? And who do you need to connect with? Because I think a lot of organic networking has disappeared. So we're not just naturally bumping into people or meeting new people. So your whole network, it could start eroding during this time. And as you said, we thought it was a sprint, so we thought maybe we've just hit pause. But
Yeah.
actually, this sprint is going to keep going. So think about who do you need to connect with. And then in terms of actually being...
And when you say map your stakeholders, we tend to think very often about putting them into some kind of grid that's got power and influence, or whatever way you want to do it, you know, how relevant they are to your project, all very kind of left brain stuff. How do you tend to do that? Keep a handle on your stakeholders?
I think sometimes it is that deliberate where you just map out and say, which departments do I need to keep touching? How do I keep my manager, maybe the level above, how does the person above my manager know that? There is also something more natural, which is, who do I have affinity with or synergies with? Who do I work with where we really spark off each other and we give each other ideas? It's really supportive, because those people would be great people to have more contact with now, because we're not sat next to each other at work. So I think also think about who you connect with and have a similar approach with, as well as the classic, who do I need to influence? And then you've got to just think about, how do you present yourself when you're talking to that person? So if it is on video, what are you wearing so that you stay visible? You know, don't camouflage yourself with the background. I've seen some people where they're wearing the same color as what's behind them. And in a meeting, we were just talking about a Zoom meeting that had 28 people in it, which is pretty challenging. So how do you stay visible? Well, prepare in advance so you actually have something worthwhile to say. Don't just speak up for the sake of it, but you need to make sure you speak up in a meeting, and you come prepared so that when you speak up, people remember your contribution.
Yeah, and that remembering is very, very important, isn't it? So whilst, as you mentioned it about wearing a different color to what's behind you, so I've been rather lucky this morning, but also, what do you think about these artificial backgrounds, the kind of Dr. Spock, everyone disappearing up to the Starship Enterprise every time they move? Is that okay? I can understand why they do it, but what do you think?
I understand why people do it, and certainly if you're doing professional presenting, or I've been hosting conferences and we have like a green screen and it's a fully professional backdrop, that's fine. But actually at home, it's a bit distracting for the audience if you disappear and come back out into the background. And the human eye can tell it's artificial, even if you don't have the Golden Gate Bridge. So I don't think it's a great experience for people connecting with you. It feels like you're hiding something. And, you know, my sister was on a call the other day with her backdrop screened out, because all her backdrop was children's toys. So she wanted to hide that. And then in the middle of her call, her cat leapt up on the chair, and this cat's head just appeared and disappeared. And it totally threw everyone, and they had a good laugh. It's definitely helping people connect on a personal level, but it didn't necessarily position my sister in the kind of most professional light to have her cat photobomb.
With a kind of Alice in Wonderland moment of some sort, by sounds of things.
Well, it was very quick, so people weren't sure what animal it was, but it made them laugh.
Yeah, I guess so. But I guess this then leads to what you're just saying, Emily. It's about what people remember about you, and so how has the last few months affected how people either portray their brand or how other people recognize another person's brand?
Well, there's two other parts of brand that I want to talk about: authenticity and authority. And authenticity has actually been massively helped by us working from home, because when we're talking to each other, we're in our natural environment. So you are seeing people's pets, kids, kitchens, bookcases. And actually that's really nice, because the more authentic we are, the more people feel they can trust and connect with us. So I'm sure a lot of people watching will have found some relationships at work have really improved because there's more authenticity. The downside is if you get a bit too authentic and you start really just wearing your very casual clothes at home, or your backdrop's a bit of a mess, maybe you are naturally messy, but you've got to think about, what does that say to people? If they see quite an ordered, structured background, professional presentation, they'll think you're someone who's in control, you've got everything covered, you're structured. if you're Zooming someone and you look like you've literally just thrown on a t-shirt, haven't done your hair, and the room's a mess, you're also saying to that person that I'm not going to take care over your work. So that's where we've got to be careful that we don't slide too far. And that comes onto authority as well, because authority is all about people seeing that you're the expert and listening to what you have to say. And that is where presenting yourself a bit more professionally and coming to meetings prepared so you can make a positive contribution. So it's not that you just dialed into the Zoom at the last minute while you were making your coffee. You actually stopped and thought about the meeting and treated it just as you would have done if it was in person. So I do worry that sometimes people might get a little bit too relaxed. And I do also think that people starting their careers might be a bit less aware of their personal brand. It's something I speak about and coach on a lot. And you do have to think explicitly about what you're projecting. Don't leave this to chance.
And that's in the context of what you want people to experience of you, or feel, or trust. You know, how do you think, okay, well, this is what my brand is. I remember I worked in a bank a long time ago, and we were all sent off to have our colours done. And I'm a summertime, springtime person, or whatever it is. I can't remember what it was, but then suddenly everyone started dressing, but that really did not feel authentic. And for me, it's also about what you do, not just how you look or what the background looks like. It's do you keep your promises? You know, do you even make promises, or is this your hiding space?
Oh, absolutely. Values have to come into here. Skills and values have to come in. And how are you showing people what you're good at and what you care about? And the simplest way to think about it is that your brand is what people say about you behind your back. It's how they describe you. So if they've worked with you, Francis, they might then say, oh, Francis is a fantastic person to work for. He's always really prepared. He comes with great ideas. So that would be what your brand is. So people have to think about that. And again, in this new virtual stage that we're in, if you're meeting someone for the first time, that's the first impression. They will decide what your brand is. And if they were asked afterwards, oh, what was Emily like? You would want them to say positive things that were true about you. So you do have to think explicitly about, well, what am I projecting? If I want to be seen as creative, did I say anything creative in the meeting? But it has to be authentic. I will be honest, I'm not naturally a super creative person. So if I present myself and pretend that I am, that's not authentic branding. But I have lots of strengths that I can show people in how I do my work, in how I talk about the projects I've worked on. So it's just about presenting the best qualities that you have.
Yeah. And what about the other side of it? We've talked a bit about Zoom or whatever we're doing today, but what about the social media aspects of it as well? Things like LinkedIn or whatever else people are using.
Well, LinkedIn's fantastic, and it's been a great way to continue to network and connect and make yourself visible outside of your company. But again, it's about sharing things that are genuinely useful for people to read, rather than just going on LinkedIn and blatantly self-promoting every 5 seconds about how great you are. So it's all about finding a balance. We have to be very aware that any social media we use, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, our employers could see what's on there. So I think we have to think quite carefully about what we're doing personally as well on social media, but use it to connect. And yes, there's less natural networking, but if you attend a webinar or a workshop virtually and you get put into a breakout room with someone and you found it really interesting to talk to them, LinkedIn is the perfect place to go and find that person and message them and say, oh, it was great to connect, great to speak to you, can we just connect on LinkedIn? Or even ask for their advice and say, oh, you spoke about this, what was the company you referenced? Always send a message. So we can still network. And I've had some wonderful virtual coffees with people I've never met before that I met on a workshop, and I've made new connections in lockdown. So it's totally possible to keep networking.
Right, great. Okay, so I guess that is all three, isn't it? Doing it that way, you're being visible, you're being authentic, and hopefully authoritative as well in terms of what you're bringing to the party.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid to share what you're good at and tell people. Just don't do it in a really irritating, braggy way. But because we're less visible, we may have to be a bit more overt and say, oh, well, this is what I'm working on, or this is what I'm proud of.
Yeah, yeah. So when people work with you, Emily, and you're helping them with their personal brand or their or even representing the brand of an organization, which is some of the work you do with us as well, what what are the main one or two things that have the biggest impact on people, A, getting it, and B, doing something different that really adds value to their brand?
Well, normally in person, if I'm presenting at a conference about this, I actually change a load of things about my appearance live in front of the audience. And then they're really shocked to see what a different impression that gives. So basically make it look less professional. So I think one of the biggest things is, however much we don't want to judge a book by its cover, humans are highly visual. There's a reason we're all using Zoom with our cameras. So just number one, really think about, how do I present myself? And what's in my background? What are people seeing? And then the other aspect is just self-awareness. I get my clients to just sit and write down a list of everything they're good at, every project they did that they did a good job on, their strengths, the things that they find easier than other people. Like, we don't always even realize what our strengths are, but it's the things that you find easier than your colleague, that people come and ask you for help with. Just spend that time to reflect and work out what you're good at. And then do think about, how can I showcase that to other people? How can I even let my manager know, I really love troubleshooting. Can you put me on a project that needs some troubleshooting, please?
Right.
Just being conscious of it and sharing it.
Yeah, so there's huge piece there around self-awareness, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that. There's a couple of topics that you've brought up that I want to come back to. And I think remote management just might be the vehicle for doing that. So is it okay if we move on to that now?
Please do.
So let's look at remote management. And it seems to me that there's developed a juxtaposition between remote management on the one hand and remote leadership on the other hand. Now, right at the beginning of all of this situation, strong managers just got everything super organized, nailed down, stabilized their business, stabilized their team pretty quickly. In my opinion, remote leaders have had a much tougher job providing direction and vision through such uncertainty, and doing this really with poise and purpose and confidence, I would say, as well. And it's tough to be confident when you haven't got a clue what's coming down the line. So Emily, what have you seen happening out there?
Well, first of all, I want to say to any managers on this call, please pat yourselves on the back, because if you didn't have to run a team, you probably had a slightly easier time of it. But having to take care of yourself and a whole team was hard work. And we saw a load of managers step up and do a fantastic job of crisis management, of checking in with their people. We've been doing lots of well-being work with sales clients where they've been running webinars and really stepping up to take care of their people. So that's been fantastic. I do think there was a little bit of helicopter management. We talk about helicopter parenting, where people are just hovering over their children the whole time in case they fall over. And I think we may have gone a little bit far, over supervision, maybe not empowering people, checking up versus checking in. So I think it comes back to this point you made at the beginning of balance. Maybe that was very helpful at the beginning of the crisis, but now as a manager, how do you find that balance between being engaged with your people and supporting them, and at the same time empowering them and giving them responsibility and letting them handle it? And then from a leadership perspective as well, it's increasingly challenging to communicate with your people when it's virtual. So how do you keep them communicate with them? How do you keep them engaged with the vision and engaged with the purpose? And you've got to bring your people with you when they're still dealing with, how do they work from home if they're sharing an office with their partner and they've not got childcare, or their children who went back to school have just been sent home for 2 weeks quarantine because someone sneezed. So there's some huge challenges there for leaders and managers. And one of the top things to focus on is communication, and not assuming that you as the manager or leader know the answers. And in fact, I was interviewing Paul Pomeroy, who's the CEO of McDonald's UK this week, and he is an inspirational leader for his business. And I asked him what the top skills were, and the first one he said was listening.
Right.
And at first we had to just take control of the situation, but now you've got some time, talk to your people and listen to them, find out what's working for them in terms of communication, in terms of how much active management they need, in terms of what ideas do they have for for how we change the business and move forward, because most of your good ideas will come from your people versus you coming up with them on your own. I think that was really good advice, is that if we just start listening more.
I think that's true, and I think it also raises this thing that you know, when you're in an environment like I am today, although I'm the only person here, you have those by the way moments, or the water cooler moment, and it's easier to see what's going on, but it's also easier to, it feels more fluid, and that things happen in an easier way. And yesterday I had lunch with a really, really good friend who's a program manager. And I said to him, what's the biggest challenge your organization has got with the current situation? And his answer really surprised me, but probably shouldn't have, because he said it's the absolute proliferation of collaboration tools. Every team's got a different collaboration tool. They've all got their favorites. None of them talk to each other. There's a whole GDPR world and everything on the back of that as well. But, you know, we've added a real type of complexity to our work that just wasn't there before, and things that looked like they would make our lives easier might not have.
Absolutely.
So we hear about managers whose diaries are completely full, back to back. They've suddenly realized they're not commuting, so they expect everybody to be on a call and to do this and to do that. What would your advice be to those workaholic remote workers or remote leaders? Because there's a lot of them.
And they're not even workaholics. It's just that that's what happens if you don't take control of your diary. If you just, you know, there's kind of death by technology happening at the moment, where the technology starts running our lives, and people think, oh well, because it's Zoom, I can do a back-to-back meeting. There's no break between, so I should do it. And I think it's why right now I'm really pleased that we're having this conversation, because we've done so well to get through a crisis. And I think businesses have actually done incredibly well with how they've adapted and used technology and everything. It's been fantastic. But now we've, you know, things are a little bit more stable, and we know we'll be virtual for a while. It's the perfect time to stop and take stock. And again, you might do this with your team and just say, okay, what is working and what isn't working? And is the technology actually being painful, or is it being additive? So actually, if it's not working, can we just use it in a different way? Or to your point on the whole water cooler moment, for which there's now a million different apps to try and get you to have these synergistic conversations. But is it much simpler than that? Is it that you just have a conversation as a team and recognize that sometimes you will get more out of just having an unstructured conversation with no agenda? That actually, if you just went and talked to your colleagues about what you're working on, with no agenda for them to help you, but just talking through a problem or an idea, it really helps the brain process it and come up with new ideas. And so you might just say, right, well, let's just have a Zoom at these 2 times every week, and we would like you to come and share an idea. Or if you don't have one, come and listen and talk with other people. But as long as you have that conversation up front about why are we doing this, what is the benefits, it doesn't need to be some very complex technology. It can just be a simple call.
Yeah, and I know we were laughing a bit yesterday, but you know, we went through the, you know, the Lencioni death by meeting thing. So you have your weekly tactical, your monthly strategic, you have your daily huddle, and all the rest of it. Yeah. And as a team, in the end, we sat there and said, do you know what? This isn't really, the daily one isn't adding value. The other ones are there, but the daily one doesn't add that much value. Let's do without it. And I felt a massive separation anxiety from that. And I kind of miss talking to these guys, just even shooting the breeze. So I'm setting myself up here for failure, as you well know. But so I'm thinking, I haven't told the team yet, but I'm thinking of just having a couple of drop-in sessions a week, which might be welcomed with open arms, or it could just be an oh no moment for them, where they think, oh no, I better go there and be there. And if Francis told me to come with an idea, I better come with an idea. Oh my God, and all of that stuff. And then the icing on the cake, as I said to you, I'm thinking of doing it at 8:30 in the morning. So there's a catalogue of errors. Would you like to use that as a case study and tell me how I should be doing this?
8:30 in the morning, you wouldn't get me there because I'm not an early morning person. So you wouldn't want to just see me looking miserable at 8:30 in the morning. So you might have to pick a few times. I think it comes back to this balance, and you mentioned it at the very beginning, that there's been a lot of uncertainty, and we as humans need a certain amount of structure and certainty, and then a certain amount of variety and things we can control ourselves. So if you make something like that optional, you're putting some structure in that people can participate with, but they can also choose not to. Whereas for the managers who have massively overscheduled, right, every day there's a huddle, then there's an end of day call. I mean, there are some high performance sales teams where that is just how they operated before COVID, which makes sense. But if you didn't operate like that before COVID and you're overscheduling things, which is this helicopter management, and some people in your team who love structure may really like it, but most people will feel like they don't have control over their time because other people are telling them when they have to do certain things. And that's where I think as a manager and a leader, you've got to just step back and look at what influence do I have over how people do their work and the time they have. Where's the balance between there is some structure because people need it, but they also have control and flexibility, and they can choose if they come to your 8:30 drop-in meeting or not.
But we won't see you there by the sound of things.
I'm sorry, you won't see me there.
Cool. Okay, so when we're thinking about the 2 or 3 things for remote managers, we've looked at don't assume that you know the best way to manage people. Ask questions and listen. Get technology so it works for you rather than against you in many ways. And remote managers have spent a lot of time actually supporting their individual teams and individual team members. But what about them in that equation? And I guess almost it takes us into our third topic of well-being. But before we go into it, I just want to take it as a remote manager. What should I be thinking about to give me the best chance of success and well-being going forward?
Well, as I said before, first of all, just congratulate yourself that you got through this and that you're still functioning as a team, because it was very challenging. Now is a good time you might slow down some of the pace of change that's happened, but it's also a good time to reflect and say, okay, I've just done some extreme learning on the job. I just learned how to remote manage. I didn't have a choice. But now looking forward, don't assume that you're done learning. There's a lot more to it. Can you upskill yourself? So maybe think about, okay, between now and the end of the year or into Q1 next year, what skills would I like to acquire that would help me even more with what I'm doing? And the same with your team. Map it out, sit down with them and say, okay, what are you struggling with in this remote world? How can we upskill you or get you that support? And just pause. If it feels like you can, I know we're running at 100 miles an hour, but things are a bit more settled. So can you just pause and reflect and think about the support they might need to empower them? And then coming on to really the last theme, which will be on wellbeing, is as a manager, you are a support for your team. And it's not appropriate necessarily to lean on them for the equivalent support. So you then have to think, who is supporting you?
Yes.
And where are you getting that support? Whether that's a mentor, a coach, your own manager, or a different manager, but someone senior in the business. And really make sure that you also have people who are supporting you as well.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Well, that does bring us on to this third and possibly the most important aspect that we're going to talk about today, and that is about taking care of yourself. I personally took so much from our conversation back in April that helped me, and the big one that I do remember is about the planning and planning what you're going to eat. And obviously I've eaten an awful lot in lockdown, but most of it was quite healthy. And then the other one was about getting outdoors, which, I found myself doing that a lot more. But with me, what I found is I did those in the sprint phase, and then things stabilize and it's situational normal, and I tended to forget about me. And it's only when I'm feeling the pressure, or I'm feeling a bit sluggish, or I'm feeling uncomfortable, that I then go back and remember what you've said. So I've never made it into a habit. I've made it into a sticking plaster. So what would you be saying to someone like me who's done it to a degree but haven't quite got there yet?
Well, there's a few things, and congratulations, because I know you've actually made lots of positive changes as well. But there's a few things, and we talk about it in our 12 Weeks to Transform Your Health webinar, where we start with the premise of how do you make new habits? Because if you just commit to some crazy exercise program and really rigorous regime, you get an initial burst of motivation, but that peters out, and then we revert back to old habits. So it's always worth thinking about what existing habit can I attach this to. So for example, with drinking water, which is the #1 habit that we all need to do, I have water by the bed, so before I get up, I just drink it. Before I have a meal, I make sure I've had 500 mils, and I just have this rule that I can't eat my next meal until I've made sure I've drunk the water that I needed to drink. So I've associated it to something that I love doing, which is eating, and I make myself do the healthy thing first. And then the other aspect is, if you've tried something and if you've tried it for a couple of weeks and it hasn't stuck, then actually try something else. Maybe you need to change it. Maybe the way you're doing that habit isn't quite working. And this isn't boot camp. You don't have to just make yourself do things you don't enjoy because it's healthy. Maybe you're not loving running. Maybe there's a different kind of exercise that you will really love, or you just needed variety, because quite frankly, it can get quite boring doing the same exercise every day.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I was talking to you yesterday, and I said all of those things work really well in my morning routine, but my evening routine falls apart, and I don't understand why, because I've even got a tick sheet that means I have to tick to say I've done it, and I still don't do it, and yet I do in the mornings. What's that all about?
They've actually studied this, and it turns out that we have more willpower and motivation in the morning, that psychologically we're more able to do things we don't want to do first thing. And it's why we can be more successful if we exercise in the morning. From a work perspective, when you look at your to-do list and there's something on there and you think, oh, I've got to do this, but I won't enjoy it, just do it first. Yeah. Because you're not going to feel like doing it at 4 p.m. if you don't feel like doing it at 9 a.m. So we have to gamify, we have to hack the system and say, the things that I don't enjoy doing, I've got to front load them. And things like having a really healthy breakfast. You don't tend to wake up wanting to eat chocolate cake for breakfast. So start your day with a really healthy smoothie. That's what I start with. And my new hack is, while I make the smoothie, I make some soup in my new Morphy Richards soup maker, which has been the best purchase of lockdown. And I just do it simultaneously. I just chop things up and try not to put the banana in the soup maker, because that'll go wrong. And then, so I've already done it. So my soup's already waiting for me after this webinar. But do those healthy things early on, because guaranteed by 6 or 7 o'clock, you won't feel like exercising. You'll just want to be watching TV in your PJs, eating Doritos. And even as a nutritional therapist, I have to admit, that happens to me. So even someone who's professionally meant to be healthy, our willpower can just drop at the end of the evening. Understand that, and don't expect yourself to make really healthy decisions at the end of the day.
So don't force it, but plan, I suppose. You always talk about control the controllable.
Absolutely, it's all about planning. Don't be too optimistic about how your mind's going to work and how motivated you will be to do some ridiculous program. It is worth just recognizing that we're very human, we're very fallible. I know, for example, if I have a cupboard full of unhealthy snacks, I will eat through all of them in about 2 days. So I just accept that about myself, and instead of torturing myself, I just have lots of very healthy snacks in my flat, and then I eat those. And you know, I always think about like being the boss of yourself. In the last webinar, you and SJ talked about self-leadership, which is a fantastic webinar. People should go and watch it. It's taking ownership from a work perspective, and it really is a game changer in terms of your career success. I've seen it myself. But just do the same with your health. No one else is really going to take care of your health for you, honestly. You're not a child. So the health you have, physical and mental, that you experience in the next few years will be a result of what you did now. So don't wait, as you said, don't wait until you're feeling a bit grotty. Plan regular things to do that take care of your well-being in terms of food, in terms of movement, in terms of things that make you happy. We'll talk about that a bit later, but actively do these things in advance and schedule them, just like brushing your teeth. Do them on automatic, and it's preventative. And it's really about taking ownership of your health, but not setting ridiculous expectations for yourself.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Right. Well, I'll promise I'll try all of those things. Um, you know, what are the other vital elements that you just want to bring out briefly now for people so that they really are taking care of their well-being in the long term, but also in the context of where we are now?
Well, routines are really important, and we work really well on that. And if you get into a routine of exercising at a certain time of day every day, you'll suddenly realize that without even looking at the clock, your body knows when it's time, and you'll instinctively want to go and do that exercise. So it is worth establishing a routine, and for the first couple of weeks, set an alarm and make yourself follow it before it becomes automatic. So good routines are really important. And as again, you may have taken on a temporary routine because you thought that lockdown was temporary. So just reevaluate it and say, does this routine work for me? Should I try starting work earlier in the day, or am I better with my exercise at lunchtime because it gets me moving? And just play around with that. Something else that's going to be incredibly important going into winter is sunlight. And we spoke about it last time. It's important for your mood, it's important for your energy, your immunity. Your body is setting all those systems off sunlight. So if you don't get out in the sun, the body loses its cues to run your metabolism and immunity. And especially in winter when there's less natural sunshine, you need to get out every day. So it might be that going for a lunchtime walk is a perfect way to get a bit of a break from the screen, because we're all over Zoom. So get a break from the screen, get out in sunshine. And even with your screen time, if you can take calls, if you can, I know it sounds so old fashioned, but don't Zoom everything. Just pick up the phone to someone, and you can even go for a walk while you're talking to them, as long as you're listening to them. Or you can even do, I've been known to be doing squats while I'm on the phone to people, which is a good thing the camera's not on. But try not to have as much screen time, balance it out with sunlight. And then the last one, which is so important, is we have to be very kind to ourselves. This is a tough challenge. We've got World Mental Health Day on Saturday, and it feels more pertinent this year than ever because it's been such a challenge. And there can be this, we can be so tough on ourselves where we just think, well, I need to just cope and I need to just do this really well. And Emily's given all this advice and I need to try and be really healthy. But we're human, so be kind to yourself and plan your pleasure. I know that doesn't sound very spontaneous, but block out a time every weekend. So maybe it's Sunday afternoon where you will ignore any to-do list and you will just do things that you love. That, we talked about when we were catching up yesterday, we talked about being a pleasure pig. But what things really, really make you happy and make you feel good? For me, it might just be reading a magazine in the bath, which for some reason to me feels like a total luxury, or eating dark chocolate, which is totally my kryptonite. But also have variety. As people, we can get bored quite easily, and with lockdown, that's going to happen even more. So try new pleasures. Maybe it turns out that you love painting, you just haven't tried it, or try some new recipes in the kitchen, but really make time to do things that make you feel good and make you happy.
Yeah, and actually, I found the opposite of that sometimes. I remember years ago they said when you're stressed, what people often do is they'll add something. They'll add a gym routine, or they'll add learning music. And one of the hardest things I've had to learn sometimes is just to be still and stop. And that is but it really does work. But it takes so much discipline at the beginning.
It does. We talk about it in the Transform Your Health webinar about a daily power down, where you just start for 10. It's like, when the computer's running, and I do this, I have a million windows running, and then the computer starts whirring because it's overheated. And that's what our life is like now. Our brains are running a million apps and windows. And so you just, sometimes if you're feeling either your energy's crashed or you're just feeling a bit overstimulated, just stop and sit in a chair in the silence for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it might feel incredibly unnatural because we don't do that, which we should, but your energy drops and then it comes back up again. So having those little moments of quiet is so important.
I do the square breathing. So breathe in for so many seconds, hold it, let it go, don't have any breath in you and that just has such an amazing physiological effect on you very quickly, actually.
Yeah, just slowing everything down. If you're into meditation, meditate. if you're not, just download the Calm app and start listening.
Yeah.
And back to the point about stripping things out, you know, I recently had a very hectic week, and I looked at my to-do list and just, you know, when your kind of chest just tightens up and you think, oh, how do I do this? And then you know the feeling. And then I just said, okay, but if I couldn't do this, if I could only work for an hour a day, what would I have to do? And I wrote a new, very short to-do list that had only 3 things on it. And
right.
I just did those 3 things. And I said, the other things, if I do them, great. If I don't, okay. But if you're getting to that level of stress and anxiety, cut yourself some slack and just say, okay, I've got to cut back on what I'm doing. Not necessarily for the whole month, but just this week. Just I'm going to take some things off the list and just pare my schedule back until I've recharged and I'm ready again.
Great. Well, Emily, I know we've got some final thoughts that we'll share in a moment, but actually we've got a couple of good questions have come in.
Brilliant.
So is it okay with you if I launch those at us and see where that takes us? So the first one has come in. It says, how can managers start the check-in conversation? It can feel like a handbrake turn compared to regular task-based one-to-ones. Sorry, I found that hard to say.
I know what you mean though. It can feel a bit artificial, can't it?
Yes.
I think it's one of those things where, first of all, do let people know why you're calling, or put it in the invite, so that then it's so funny, because as a manager you think you're calling someone because you care about them, but if your manager puts in just a call into your diary and you don't know what it's about, that can invoke a lot of stress. So just say, I just want to have a call to just find out how you're getting on and just talk through, you know, what you're dealing with at the moment. I think it's really important to just ask someone what they're doing to support themselves. So just say, how are you taking care of yourself? What, you know, put the positive and the negative in there. What have you enjoyed, or what's going well? What are you finding a bit challenging? How are you getting support for that? Can I help with that? So there's a few questions you can go through. I think I was just going to say, I think also as a leader or manager, if you never share with people what you struggle with, they might find it quite hard to open up in that conversation, because you seem superhuman. And actually, if you're honest and share with your team that, yes, you know, you've struggled with the scheduling, or, you know, you've struggled to eat healthily, or even you've had some days when you felt really down. And I think we all have in lockdown. It's been emotionally very challenging. If you share that, it's more likely that your people will feel like they can share it with you too. And then you can talk about how they can be supported.
And as you were talking, I thought it sort of depends a bit on what your personal brand is as a leader. So if you are a pace-setting workaholic, you know, leaving a trail of disaster behind you sometimes, people would find it very hard to adapt to that. And that might take time.
Absolutely. It might take time, but it's really worth doing. And when I was having this conversation with Paul Pomeroy this week, he said he's a very noisy leaver. And I said, what does that mean? Are you doing donuts in the car park on your way out? But he said, I want people to see that I have a work-life balance and that I leave at a good hour, because it empowers everybody else too. So if you are a leader and you're visibly being a workaholic, you're not really taking care of the well-being of your people, because you're implying that for them to succeed, they have to do the same thing. And again, if you have a moment of realization, you know, share it. I was interviewing another leader this week where he had a moment of realization, and he suddenly realized he needed to take care of his health. And then he shared it with the company he works at. And that was so powerful to actually admit and say, I was one of those people that just plowed on relentlessly, and I've now realized that wasn't healthy. That's so powerful to share that. It is.
And actually, we've got a question now from somebody on the receiving end of that. So I don't know if there's a top tip here, but certainly there's something about assertiveness. But yeah, so my manager is one of those workaholic types and is constantly bombarding me with requests for meetings and updates. What can I do to A, protect myself, and B, train her actually to give me more space?
It's very difficult, because you have to have a certain level of confidence to talk to a manager about this. And ideally, your manager should initiate the conversation. But it is worth just being honest with them, because they're not psychic, and particularly virtually, they might not pick up that you're struggling. So if you say, look, can we have a call? And you say, I find it quite stressful, the level of overscheduling that's happening, or I'm finding it hard to do the work, like to sit down and do the work because there's all these meetings. Can we talk about how my week is structured? If you can do that, if they're open to it, then you can have a conversation and say, look, this is what works for me, or this is what doesn't work. And do be prepared to have boundaries and say, I finish work at 6, so I need to have time at the end of the day to get my emails wrapped up, so I can't have a meeting at 5 p.m. It does take confidence. It is difficult, and you may get pushback, but you will have to raise that conversation. And if they don't respond positively, you may need to talk to someone else in the organisation who can help you with it. I mean, I had a situation when I worked in RBS for 10 years where the COO asked me for something on a Sunday, and I just happened to see it because I was on my phone and a notification came up, and I messaged the COO and said, I can answer this quickly, so I'm answering it, but just so you know, I won't normally respond to emails on Sundays. So I did take the opportunity to say, this is a one-off, because otherwise, if you do respond late at night, or you do accept all her invitations for meetings, you're training her to think that you're okay with it. So we do have to stand up and draw a boundary as well.
Very good. One last question, which is a practical question, and then we'll go into a summary if you like. So I know daylight is important, but it's going to get tougher to be outdoors when the clocks change and winter sets in. Any tips? By a coat.
Well, you know what? It even works if you just stick your head out the window.
Right.
And interestingly, it even works if you just stick your arm out the window, because we have sunlight receptors in our skin, but it's good to have it on the face. So actually, in the morning, when you're having your cup of tea, can you just go and stand outside for 5 minutes, or just put your head out the kitchen window for 5 minutes and wrap up warm? That gets your metabolism going in the morning. And I appreciate first thing in the morning when it's frosty and cold is not the ideal time to go for a walk, but just get that tiny bit of fresh air, open a window, get some sunlight. Okay. Lunchtime is going to be a great time to go for a walk, wrap up warm. If you don't jog already, take up jogging, because it just keeps you warm while you're walking, and try and find some exercise you enjoy outside. If you struggle, recruit your friends and go for a walk with a friend, and then it's socializing at the same time as exercising.
Which is a very good thing to do, the social contact. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. So we've had lots to think about in the really short time that we've been together today. In the next few months, I don't think they're going to come as any kind of surprise to us, but it is important that we get the balance right. You know, we should have learned something from what's happened, and that should help us get the balance right moving forward. So just to sign us off here, Emily, what are your top tips for thriving in our new normal?
I've got 5 tips that I'm going to leave you with, and this is really based on my experience of coaching people, and I've done over 30 wellbeing webinars and workshops since lockdown started, so this is what I've been talking about constantly. The first one is self-leadership, and just watch the last Sagos webinar. I think it's up on YouTube, and SJ did that.
And the website's on there.
And the website. So go and watch that to understand about taking control yourself in a work setting. It makes us feel better when we feel a bit more in control, particularly now. But also apply it to your well-being. So be the CEO of your own health and take ownership of that. The next one, which comes back to the topic we spoke about earlier, is be conscious of your brand and your relationships. So how are you connecting with people? Are you still connecting with the right people? Are you meeting new people? It's important for your career. And also, what are you presenting? So how are you coming across? Just think about it. Think about what's your brand? How might people describe you? If you're really brave, ask your colleagues how they describe you behind your back and take the feedback. It's helpful. Okay. Yeah, Francis is like, oh gosh.
Oh.
It's such a good exercise with people you trust.
We do 360s, so I sort of know, but I think I might just ask a different question.
Just ask. Anyone from Sagos watching, just tell Francis what you think about him, what you say behind his back. Number 3, use a routine. Set a healthy routine with boundaries about work time, personal time, pleasure time. plan your food. And if your routine isn't working, it hasn't stuck, then come up with a new one, reevaluate and say, okay, I need a new routine. Let's try something new. Number 4, make one change at a time. We've given so many tips, you know, Francis and I, we could talk all day, and you might have written some notes of things you might want to change, but we work well when we make changes one at a time, not 10 at once. So you might make a list of things you want to work on or improve on or learn, but just pace yourself with it. And then the final one I've written down is be a pleasure pig, and really plan activities that are going to bring you joy and pleasure. And particularly as we go into the winter months, think about things that will be weather appropriate, but that you'll enjoy, so that you're getting these regular happiness top-ups to help you keep feeling good.
Excellent. Right, well, I will listen back on this and make sure I write those down, and we'll check in a couple of weeks' time, see how we're doing. But thank you for doing that, Emily. That was, as always, super fascinating and motivating, actually, and inspiring, as it always is when we work together. So thank you very much for doing that. Thank you to everybody who's been on the webinar. Thank you very much for your questions. They were very insightful and sometimes challenging. And I just want to make one small, quick, shameless plug, and that's our next webinar. It's in fact an international one. We've done a survey across the whole of Europe on the learning trends post-COVID. And 4 of our country managers, so myself, my colleagues in Italy, Portugal and Spain, will be talking about what that survey has told us. And we'll be talking about it from the aspect of trends, the content of training, how that's changed, the methodology of how training is changing, and very importantly, what's happening with budgets across Europe as well on training. I've been given the trends to do, and I'm really looking forward to it. It'd be great if you could join us. We'll send everybody on the webinar a link to that, which is on the 22nd of October. But if you lose that email or it goes to junk, just go to the website and please join us. So finally, thank you, Emily. Great to see you again. Great to see everybody on the call today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Thank you.